political commentators refer to Newt Gingrich as the teddy bear, and they're saying the teddy bear is angry after that attack campaign really knocked his chances around in Iowa, and so many people saying watch this space.
Yeah, I mean, his size of his body may and his rather fluffy hair may have this term, the teddy bear, but he was known when he was a politician in Washington as a bomb thrower. He was thought of as someone who was rather explosive, not someone you'd like your kids cuddling up against. So he's not always thought of as the most gentle candidate. He's a rather sort of high-tempered, emotional candidate, and I think we're probably going to see a little bit of that soon.
All right, well, we are standing by to hear from Ron Paul. As we mentioned before, he 25%, he's come in second. He really was, so many people say, the one to watch along with John Huntsman in this New Hampshire primary. Tell us more about what campaign he's been mounting.
Well, he ran for the presidency in 2008 as well. He has a very loyal group of libertarians, is the right word to use for his supporters. People who are very much against government spending, want government to be as minimal as possible in the United States. That's a long tradition in the United States and in the Republican Party, but it's one that's not often consistent. People who are against government spending domestically are often for America having a large military, with that military having an imprint abroad and going abroad to fight foreign wars now and time and again. Ron Paul is consistent. He says, well, you've got to have a small government at home and you've got to have a very limited footprint abroad. Cut government spending means cutting defence spending as well, or reducing America's defence to homeland defence. So he's got this loyal cadre of people who very much follow him around the United States, campaign very much for him wherever he goes, and this creates a lot of energy, but the problem is that those views are very much out of step with the mainstream of the Republican Party, the leadership of the Republican Party, and he's in some ways also, given his age, he's in his mid-70s, just not the candidate they want to see against Barack Obama. So in some ways he's, I think, will change some elements of the debate, but he's a massive distraction in some regards for the Republican Party. Yeah,
it's interesting to be one of the older nominees, but he has such a strong following amongst so many young Republicans, given his left-leaning ideals, as you say, his anti-war stand. But many say, look, his core following still not enough to really make him to be a leading contender.
Yes, he got this support by being against things like the Patriot Act, saying, look, Americans don't need their computers to be surveilled, they don't need their library records to be surveilled. Very much a freedom of rights, freedom of information type stances that he took in the United States Congress during the Bush years, which was very much out of step with his party. He sometimes was the only person voting against some of the homeland security issues on privacy grounds, on freedom of movement, freedom of behaviour grounds. So he's very much someone who believes in individual rights, and this gains him a group of supporters, and also his views on the war. If you heard him speak about the Iraq war, about the Afghanistan war, you'd believe maybe he was a man of the left, but he is in fact a very hardline conservative on a number of other issues. So he's hard to place for some people, but I think this word libertarian is the best way to describe him.
Well, the fact that he has placed second, what does this say, do you think, about, is there a change in the mindset of many Republicans?
I think if we could say anything about it, we might say, look, there's a want amongst 25% of the Republican Party for America to be pretty isolationist, pretty non-interventionist in the rest of the world, and that's always been there, and it's been suppressed maybe for quite some time in American public life. That in the early period of the Cold War, and we know in the early period of the First and Second World War, there were a lot of Republicans who said, look, America shouldn't go abroad. These are European problems or foreign problems. We shouldn't be involved. And that element in the Cold War slowly got out of American political conversation. It got back into conversation at the end of the Cold War. There were some who wanted to see America really consolidate and bring its troops home. But I think in the wake of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, and maybe what is seen as the failures of Bush's foreign policy, this element of Republican thinking has burst back into life. And we shouldn't be entirely surprised. It's always been there in American politics, and Ron Paul has given it a voice. Now, he's probably, I don't think, the most effective spokesperson for that position, but he has gained a lot of support for putting those ideas on the table.
While we wait for Ron Paul to address his followers there, we're just looking at a live shot out of Manchester, USA. Let's, if we can, talk about Rick Perry. How do you rate his chances?
Well, Rick Perry is a great case study in the importance of knowing the issues, being able to handle yourself well in a debate, being on top of detail. Modern politics seems to shine a very strong light on these debate performances in the United States these days. There's a lot of them. I think it's very different to Australian politics in this regard. Candidates have to go through almost what seems like an endless series of debates. Well over 10 or more debates have gone on this time round. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama debated each other something like 26 or 27 times. And if you can't handle yourself on the basic details in debates, your candidacy can really fall apart. And it was Rick Perry's campaign for a while to win. He was the hot favourite for a small period after he announced his candidacy. He was a candidate who had never lost an election in Texas. He was referred to by some of his opponents as like running against God. Not just because he was strongly religious, because he was seemingly unbeatable. And he's really floundered, and I think his campaign is about to collapse. I'd say South Carolina is his last hope. I don't think he'll do particularly well there. I think by the end of January, we're likely to see Rick Perry retreat to Texas and probably have his political aspirations to be a United States president ended at this point and thought of as a bit of a comedy act in the history of this campaign.
Perry's even been campaigning this week in South Carolina ahead of the next contest there, of course, on the 21st of January. We touched on this a little earlier, how important, given the Iowa result, stretched into, I think it was 1:45 in the morning we finally, or in the American time when we got a result in, how important are these speeches that we're going to be hearing coming in this afternoon from all of the key candidates?
Well, I think they give the candidates an opportunity to once again put their ideas across, put their style of presentation across to a very big audience. And that's what Iowa denied Rick Santorum to some extent. American viewers weren't all up at 2 a.m. in the morning, so he wasn't able to get the audience that, say, a Barack Obama with an earlier win in 2008 gave what was considered to be a crucial speech, which really set his campaign alight. That speech really introduced him to many more Americans, introduced him to a world audience to some extent. In 2004, Howard Dean was the hot candidate in Iowa. He gave a speech that was well towards the bizarre end of political speeches. He basically shouted each of the places he was going to campaign in America next in this speech. Looked like he'd completely lost the plot, and it became part of the late night comedy routine for the next week or so. It was dubbed the I Have a Scream speech, and he was done as a candidate. That really ended him. So there's a big audience, big stakes in these speeches because they save you a lot of money. If you do a good job in them, you don't have to spend as much money on advertising, and more money comes in from new sources.
Yeah, well, just on that, if you were Mitt Romney's campaign manager at the moment, actually, no, we're not going to go live now. We're going to wait until we actually hear from Ron Paul. What would you be saying to Mitt Romney in terms of so much have been made about the super PAC system and the millions that have been pouring in on his behalf? To what extent does he need to distance himself in the weeks ahead, or do more to try and distance himself from his super PAC?
Yes, this is a fascinating element of American politics. A lot of people would think it was money, and more money that runs American politics. And I suppose these organisations known as super PACs, who can pour in money on behalf of a candidate, sometimes without mentioning their names, supposedly being divorced from the candidate's campaign, and that this money is unending, that there's no limits to it. Where with candidates, there's got to be a lot of declarations of where money can come from. Individuals and companies can only give a certain amount of money, so there are limits. Supreme Court decision recently allowed for this somewhat of a loophole, and these super PACs were very effective at attacking Newt Gingrich, putting up Newt Gingrich's 3 marriages, his associations with some of the mortgage lending companies in the United States, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and it really made Gingrich look quite bad in Iowa. The reverse is about to happen. What will happen in the next week or so is that Gingrich-linked super PACs are going to attack Mitt Romney as being a corporate raider, ruthless about jobs in America, not concerned at all about the livelihood of working Americans. And so the tables are going to be turned to some extent, and I think Romney will probably be quite happy if the supporting super PACs he has come back with positive stories about how he grew companies, or helped grow companies like Domino Pizzas and a big stationery company in the United States called Staples. So I think we're going to see a debate about job creation, maybe an issues debate for a while in this campaign, but it's going to be played out by surrogates to some extent.
Yeah, South Carolina, obviously, we talked about this before, a more conservative electorate, a large block of evangelical Christians, and that's not going to work well for Romney.
Well, I didn't think so. I mean, I thought South Carolina would be a very difficult place for Romney, but he's ahead in the polls. And there's also retirees down in South Carolina. There's probably a local community that's not all hardline Christian conservative, but in the past, candidates like George W. Bush have really done strongly in South Carolina. It's been a place, as you say, where Christian conservatives get out to vote in large numbers. So if Romney could win there, his opponents, I think, would be in really serious trouble. And this would be basically the last stand for Rick Perry, probably the last stand for Rick Santorum in South Carolina. And Gingrich, I think, would need to finish possibly second in South Carolina to really make himself a viable candidate. So it will be, I think that will be the real true moment of this campaign. Iowa, New Hampshire, in some ways the curtain raises. South Carolina, I think, will separate out those who will go on into the distance of this campaign and those who will be defeated.
Yeah, who do you expect to see bow out in the next few weeks?
Well, I can't really see the point of the Huntsman campaign beyond today. He's got his name in lights, but I think he's a 2016 candidate. Rick Perry, I think, will go on, but should collapse his campaign. Probably will after South Carolina. Santorum and Gingrich, there's obviously no politics for them to go back to. They're people who are out of office. Perry can go back and be governor of Texas. Newt Gingrich, this is his last shot, I would have thought, at running. And Santorum, it's getting longer and longer since he was a politician. He was a senator from Pennsylvania. So those two will be a question of money. And Gingrich has his own money. He's made a lot of money in recent years. Santorum, I think, will struggle to go beyond South Carolina.
Are there going to be any surprise, there always are, I guess, surprise twists and turns in the road to the White House, but are you tipping any candidates as potentially ones to watch?
Well, American commentators have been describing this Republican season as the yoga season because there's been so many twists and turns. But just as you come up with a metaphor, it seems like that metaphor is completely redundant because Romney has had this, straight run, winning Iowa, now seemingly winning New Hampshire by a handsome margin, and if he wins South Carolina. But I think the rise and fall of Romney in 2011 in the polls really reminds us that we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. That Romney has strong support at the moment. He's done very well, but there's a pretty thin layer to that support. It's not love that his supporters, I think, give him. And therefore, there is this potential of Newt Gingrich, I think, coming back into this race and being the anti-Romney candidate, and Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney fighting a very nasty primary season, which goes on for a couple of months, levelling quite sort of extreme claims at each other. Barack Obama's team rubbing their hands, thinking this is terrific. Why don't these guys knock each other down more? But this might not be the worst thing for Mitt Romney. It might toughen him up. It might make him a better candidate in some ways to run against Barack Obama. So in American politics, I think, as the 2008 campaign where people were predicting Obama would win 1 minute and Hillary Clinton the next, I think we are at times better off to, wait and see.